The guard tower light swept across the wire, catching faces that did not belong in any recruiting poster. Broken noses, prison tattoos, hands that looked more comfortable around a bottle or a knife than a rifle. This wasn't a camp of heroes. It was a cage for the mistakes the Army wanted to forget. They called it Brig Island, a fenced-off patch of coral and mud, a short boat ride from the real base. Here, the Army dumped everything it didn't know what to do with. Brawlers, thieves, black market kings, cowards who swung first at officers when the drink hit too hard. Some had killed, some had stolen, some were just too wild to fit inside neat lines of marching boots. Corporal Jack, Red Mallory, sat on an overturned crate, cigarette glowing in the dark, listening to the ocean slap against the pilings. He had broken a lieutenant's jaw in a dockside brawl and woke up in chains. Back home, he'd cracked safes and robbed warehouses for the mob. War hadn't changed him, it had only changed who he stole from. Out beyond the wire, searchlights swept the real harbor. Convoys formed every night now, transports loading fuel, ammunition, men. Everyone knew the Japanese were out there on a ring of islands, watching, listening, waiting to tear those convoys apart. The rumor in the brig was simple and cruel. The war's almost over. They're not going to waste a transport getting rid of us. We'll rot here until somebody remembers to sign the papers. Then, one afternoon, the gates opened and everything changed. A jeep rolled up in a cloud of dust. The guards straightened in a way they never did for their own officers. A tall man stepped down, lean, stiff, with the kind of posture that looked carved, not trained. His uniform was clean but not new, his collar bare of decorations except for a single combat badge. His eyes did not move like the others. They didn't flinch, they measured. "On your feet," barked the sergeant of the brig. The prisoners shuffled into a ragged formation. No ranks, no neat rows, just 40-odd men in faded fatigues, each with their own private history of bad decisions. The tall officer walked the line in silence. He stopped in front of Red, eyes flicking down to the faint scar along Red's knuckles, an old knife line. Then he glanced at the man's boots, repaired with stolen wire. He said nothing, moved on. He paused at a big Texan with hands like shovels and a cauliflower ear, at a thin, quiet kid with careful eyes and inked symbols creeping up his neck, at a wiry Puerto Rican with a homemade poker chip in his fingers even now. He was not looking for discipline. He was looking for something else. When he finished the circuit, he turned to the brig sergeant. "These 40, he said. "I'll take them." Just like that. The men looked at each other. Take them where? To another camp? To a firing squad? The officers seemed to read it on their faces. "My name is Major Reed," he said, voice flat, controlled. "You are all here because you broke something the Army cares about. Bones, rules, trust, equipment." A few snorted. One laughed under his breath. Reed didn't raise his voice. "The war does not care about your records. It cares about results." He let that hang in the air for a second. "I need 40 men who are not afraid to do things regular units cannot do. Do not want to do. Will not admit doing." Red's cigarette burned down to the filter. This did not sound like another sermon about redemption and honor. It sounded like a job offer. "You will not get your stripes back," Reed continued. "You will not get your good conduct medals. If you agree to this, you are still criminals on paper." He took one step closer, eyes hard. "But if you live, you will not die in this cage. You will die as soldiers, and a handful of people you will never meet will live because of it." The Texan spat in the dirt. "What's the catch, Major?" "There's always a catch." Reed gave the faintest shadow of a smile. "The catch is simple. There is no rescue plan, no backup, no glory parade." He looked down the line. "You will go where the maps say there are 30,000 enemy troops. You will walk into their teeth. You will break something vital, and then you will find your own way out. Or you won't." Silence. Even the guards looked uneasy now. This wasn't a volunteer for KP speech. This was something colder. Red felt a familiar itch in his chest. It was the same feeling he'd had staring at a warehouse safe with 2 guards on the door and too many alarms. Fear hooked onto curiosity and turned into a jagged, hungry interest. Major Reed pointed at him. "You," he said. "Mallory, you have experience with locks." Red narrowed his eyes. "I have experience with debts, sir." "A lock is just a debt the door owes you," Reed replied. "You'll do." He moved down the line, calling others by name without checking a clipboard. He had studied their files. He knew who had strangled a man in a dock brawl and who had run a black market that reached 3 islands, who had shot his own sergeant, and who had broken into an officer's safe just to see if he could. To each, he attached a skill, not a crime. You know explosives. You know radios. You know how to keep a man screaming for 6 minutes without killing him. You, he said to the quiet kid with the neck tattoos, know how to disappear in a crowd and come back with something that didn't belong to you. That is reconnaissance, just without the uniform. One by one, he turned convicts into tools. When he called the 40th name, he turned back to the group. This is not compulsory, Reed said. You can stay in this brig until the war is done. No one will blame you. No one will remember you either. He let the words sink in. Or, he said softly, you can come with me and everything you were good at before the war becomes the only thing that might keep you alive during it. The ocean roared behind the wire. Beyond the horizon, ships moved like silent shadows, preparing for some operation nobody in this camp would ever be briefed on. Red flicked his dead cigarette into the dirt. When do we leave, Major? He asked. Reed nodded once. Now. The guards cut the chains, not ceremonially, just with greasy tools and impatience. The cuffs fell away, leaving raw, scarred wrists. For the first time in months, the men stepped out of the gate of Brig Island without shackles. Not free, not forgiven. Just temporarily unchained, walking toward a mission that smelled like a last chance disguised as a death sentence. As the jeep pulled away and the truck behind it loaded with 40 criminals rumbled down to the dock, Red looked back at the rusted wire and rotting barracks of the brig. He realized with a cold, sharp clarity, he was trading one prison for another. The only difference was that the new one came with guns, explosives, and an enemy who actually deserved what was coming. The sea swallowed Brig Island behind them. Ahead was only dark water and an unnamed fortified rock on someone else's map, and the impossible order waiting on it. The barracks they were thrown into on the main base did not look like a regular unit's home. No posters, no flags, no painted unit crests, just bare bunks, a concrete floor, and a faint smell of oil and old blood. A guard slammed the door behind them. Locks clacked, bolts slid. They were out of the brig, but not exactly among friends. Major Reed waited for them in the open yard at dawn. The sky was a flat sheet of gray, the kind that turned the ocean and the land into the same dull color. The 40 men stood in a sloppy line, yawning, scratching, smirking. No one saluted. Reed did not ask them to. Instead, he tossed something into the dirt at Red's feet. It was a canvas bag, heavy, clinking. "Open it," Reed said. Red crouched, loosened the drawstring, and pulled out a length of coiled wire, a fat stick of dynamite, and 3 brass padlocks, mismatched, scarred, ugly. "This," Reed said, "is your new Bible." No one laughed this time. Reed began to walk, slow, hands behind his back. "Out there," he said, nodding vaguely toward the horizon. "The enemy has something we need destroyed. It is not a bunker on a map. It is a system. Radar masts, fuel tanks, ammunition caves, cable lines, relays. Break one piece, they fix it. Break the heart, and the whole island goes blind and deaf long enough for our people to come through alive." He pointed at the dynamite. "Your job is to reach a heart nobody sane would try to touch," he signaled. 4 men in plain fatigues, not base MPs, not parade ground NCOs, stepped into the yard. They moved like predators, not instructors, quiet, balanced, coiled, scars, sunken eyes, cords of muscle that came from work, not gym routines. "These are your cadre," Reed said. "They are not here to turn you into good soldiers. That is impossible. They are here to make you effective." The first, a stocky sergeant with a broken nose and pale, bored eyes, took a step forward. "My name is Sergeant Hanley," he said. "I teach you how to move and not die in the first 5 minutes. If you think you already know, good. We'll bury you early and save rations." The second, thin and weathered with a faint radio headset's tan line on his skin, spoke next. "Corporal Diaz, I teach you how to talk without speaking. Signals, radios, light, wiretap. If you fry my equipment, I'll make you run messages on foot until you puke blood." The third, a quiet man with burn scars fading into his collar, rested a hand on a crate. Warrant Officer Briggs, explosives. You're all children until you can blow a door without bringing the roof down on your own head. The last one didn't introduce himself. He simply walked up to the biggest man in the line, a 6'3" brawler from Texas, and without warning, hit him. It wasn't a fair punch. It was a short, brutal hammer into the liver, followed by a hook behind the knee. The Texan crashed to the dirt, air gone, mouth opening like a fish. The stranger knelt beside him, voice almost gentle. "I show you how to kill quietly," he murmured, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You won't know my name until you earn it. For now, call me what you like. You'll be too busy breathing to say it often." He stood, wiped a fleck of dust from his knuckles, and joined the cadre line. Red watched the Texan struggle up, fury boiling in his eyes, then dying when he realized nobody here cared how tough he'd been in prison. New world, new rules. Reed nodded, satisfied. "Your old skills brought you here," he said. "Now they will be sharpened or they will get you killed." He pointed at the far end of the yard. "Run." No formation, no cadence, just an order and an open track of dirt and coral. They ran. Around the yard first, then out through a gate, Reed's men opened with a key the guards didn't seem to have. Up a dusty slope, past fuel tanks, past the neatly ordered barracks of regular units whose men stopped to stare at the strange, ragged column pounding by. By the second hill, lungs were burning. By the fourth, sweat stung their eyes and old scars throbbed. Red's chest rattled like the inside of a broken safe. Somewhere behind him, a man coughed up something wet and red. They ran past the airstrip, where mechanics paused mid-wrench to watch. They ran along the cliff road, where waves smashed against the rocks below like artillery. Every time someone slowed, Hanley was there, wordless, expression flat, a hand in the middle of their back to shove or in their collar to drag. When they finally staggered back into the yard, legs jelly, the day had fully broken. Sun hammered down, merciless. Reed glanced at his watch. "Slow," he said simply. "Again." A groan moved like a wave through the formation, but no one spoke. They ran again. By the time he finally called a halt, 3 men were on their knees. One lay flat on his back, staring at the thin strip of sky between the roofs like it was a tunnel out to somewhere sane. Reed crouched beside him. "You can quit," he said quietly. "Right now, back to the brig. No shame in admitting you don't want to die on an island nobody's ever heard of." The man's lips trembled. "What's the point?" he rasped. "We're dead either way." Reed looked at him for a long moment. "The point is simple," he said. "There's a difference between dying because someone forgot you in a cage and dying because you did something that mattered." He stood and turned away. "Water," Hanley barked, "then drills." The rest of the day blurred into exhaustion and pain. Diaz set them in pairs with broken radios, coils of cable, dead batteries. "You will climb that tower," he said, pointing to a 50-foot skeletal mast at the edge of the compound, "and you will rig me a line I can hear a whisper on. If you drop a tool, I assume you are dropping a grenade. Don't drop anything." They climbed, hands shredded on rust and salt. On the ground, Briggs turned cracked crates of explosives into a classroom from hell. He showed them blocks of TNT, sticks of old dynamite, clay-like plastic charges, blasting caps that looked harmless until they snapped like gunshots in his fingers. "Most of you have seen this stuff only on the wrong end," he said. "A few of you tried to steal it. I'm going to teach you how to place it like a letter through a mail slot. Gentle, precise. 1 pound in the right place does more than 50 in the wrong one." Red found himself leaning forward in spite of the pounding in his head. Explosives were just another kind of safe. Metal, pressure, timing, numbers he could feel in his bones. Behind the barracks, the nameless killer, "Ghost," someone muttered, and the name stuck, took small groups into the shade. He taught them holds that cut air without leaving marks, angles of a knife that went under ribs instead of bouncing off them. How to step into a shadow and choose which part of a man to break first so he never got a sound out. "You are not here to fight fair," Ghost said. "Fair fights are for men who have time, numbers, and lawyers. You have none of those." When one man, a loudmouth from Chicago who had run rackets on 3 bases, joked about sticking Japs like pigs, Ghost moved faster than a blink. He locked him up gently, almost politely, in a choke that turned the man's face from red to purple in 5 seconds. When he let go, The ex-racketeer slumped to his knees, retching. "You talk too much," Ghost said softly. "Save the air for when you're underwater and someone's hand is on the back of your head." By nightfall, the 40 were no longer laughing. Muscles shook. Hands trembled as they tried to eat from tin plates, stew slopping onto the floor. Blisters on feet burst in boots that weren't broken in yet. Red lay on his bunk, spine one long line of ache, staring at the ceiling. Around him, the others muttered, argued, swore quietly. "This is suicide," the Texan growled. "We're fodder. That Major's crazy." "Crazy or not," the quiet kid with neck tattoos said, "he's giving us a shot, better than rotting in that cage." "What shot?" someone else snapped. "You heard him. 30,000 on that rock. 40 of us. Do the math." Red rolled his head, eyes half shut. "The math's wrong," he said. They looked at him. "It's not 40 against 30,000, he went on. "It's 40 against maybe 100 who'll ever see us coming. The rest just panic in the dark when their lights go out, their radios die, and their ammo starts cooking off in the bunker we wired an hour earlier." There was a moment of silence. "Listen to the safecracker," the Puerto Rican snorted. "Man thinks in locks and numbers." Red closed his eyes. "Locks, numbers, and time," he murmured. "You break the right lock at the right second, it doesn't matter how many guards are in the building. They all just become people running toward a problem they can't fix." He didn't know if he believed his own words yet, but he knew one thing. Major Reed did not look like a man who gambled without counting pieces first. In the small hours when the barracks had sunk into ragged snores and occasional whimpers from dreams best left unspoken, a shadow paused at the doorway. Reed watched them sleep for a moment, arms folded. Hanley stepped up beside him. "They'll break," Hanley said quietly. "Half of them, maybe more." Reed nodded once. "Good," he said. "Better here than on that island." "And the ones that don't?" Hanley asked. Reed's gaze moved to Red, to the Texan, to the quiet kid with the tattooed neck tracing old gang symbols and new scars. "The ones that don't," Reed said, "will be precisely the kind of men we need for this." Outside, waves dragged at the rocks, relentless. Somewhere beyond the black horizon, a fortress island waited, a place of tunnels, guns, and men who believed the jungle and the ocean would protect them forever. 40 criminals lay in their bunks, bodies wrecked from one day of training that felt like a sentence. They did not know it yet, but this was the easiest day they were going to have. The year was 1944, and the Pacific was on fire. On the big wall map in the operations hut, red pins had been pushed steadily west for months, inching toward Japan like a slow, bleeding tide. But one cluster of black pins still sat stubbornly in the middle of all that red. An island shaped like a crooked fist, jutting out across the sea lanes like a knife. Major Reed stood in front of that map, a mug of black coffee cooling in his hand. The island had no name on the charts the men would ever see. On his orders, it was just Target Rock. To the enemy, it was a fortress. A staff officer with circles under his eyes tapped the pinned circle with a pencil. "Japanese call it Tenrai-jima," he said. "Thunder Island. About 30,000 troops assigned there by last estimate. Infantry, coastal artillery, airfield garrison." He pointed to a ring sketched around it in grease pencil. "Any convoy headed through this corridor goes under its guns and radar coverage. We keep losing ships, we keep sending letters home." On a separate sheet, photos from reconnaissance flights were clipped in rough rows. Grainy black and white shots showed fuzzy antenna masts, camouflaged bunkers, the faint lines of cut roads spidering through jungle. Reed's eyes stayed on one image, a cluster of long, low shapes at the base of a cliff, half hidden by overhang and trees, fuel tanks, ammunition caves, a central bunker with cables running out like veins. He set the coffee down. "That's the heart," he said. "Not the airfield, not the gun batteries. This." The officer nodded reluctantly. "Signals confirms heavy radio traffic from there. Direction finding says they're coordinating patrols and spotting for coastal guns." He hesitated. "We could send a battleship group, level it from the sea." Reed shook his head. "In daylight, any ship big enough to hurt that cliff is big enough to be seen. They'll move the command out of those caves the minute they smell a bombardment coming." "And the cost?" He didn't have to finish. The officer had seen the casualty lists. Reed tapped the island. "We don't need to flatten Tenrai-jima. We just need to blind it long enough for one operation." He drew a small X near the cliff base. Break this, and every gun and every eye tied to this nerve center becomes a deaf, blind piece of steel for a few critical hours. The officer stared at the X. With what, Major? We're stretched thin as it is. Reed allowed himself a thin, humorless smile. 40 men, he said. Men we don't officially have on a mission that doesn't officially exist. The staffer blinked. You're serious? I wouldn't be standing here if I wasn't, Reed answered. Give me a submarine, a window in the patrol pattern, and full discretion on how ugly this gets. The officer looked at him for a long moment. You understand, he said slowly, that none of this can touch the official record. If it goes wrong, those 40 never shipped out. If it goes right, the after-action report will say the island's defenses failed for reasons unknown. Reed picked up his coffee again. I'm not doing this for a line in a history book, he said. I'm doing it so a few thousand kids on those transports will live to grow old enough to forget what war smells like. The officer exhaled, a sound halfway to a laugh and halfway to defeat. Fine, you'll get your submarine, and your blank line on the ledger. Back in the compound, the men didn't see any of this. They saw only that training had gone from brutal to murderous overnight. The year 1944 meant nothing to their muscles. It meant everything to the calendar. Every day the war dragged on, both sides grew more desperate. The Japanese had dug into islands like Tenrai-jima as if into a second homeland, tunnels, caves, interlocking fields of fire. The longer the Americans waited, the more concrete was poured, the more guns were emplaced, the more men were trained to die where they stood. Reed knew time was not on their side. He pushed the 40 accordingly. Obstacles appeared in the yard, walls of rough wood and oil drums, corridors built from sandbags and scrap metal. They were told these were streets and alleys of a village they would never see in daylight. Hanley ran them through it until the pattern of corners, doorways, and blind spots burned into their nerves. Then, one night, without warning, lights were killed and burning barrels were rolled in to throw wild jumping shadows. Gunfire blanks cracked. Smoke grenades spat choking fog. Again, Hanley shouted over the chaos. Low, fast, don't silhouette yourself. If you see light, you're already dead. Ghost took away their rifles for some runs and gave them only blades. The first time they stumbled into a corner where he waited, 3 men ended up flat on their backs, wrists twisted, throats under a forearm they never saw coming. In tunnels, you will not be able to swing a rifle, Ghost said calmly. You will have someone's breath on your face. Get comfortable with that now, or don't bother getting on the boat. Briggs started building mock doors. Steel plates hung on rotten hinges, wooden planks over hollow frames. Tenrai-jima is rock and concrete, he said, but they still have hatches, doors, access panels. You don't blow the wall, you blow the joint. He made them place charges with trembling hands, correcting distances in inches, in finger widths. Too far, it scratches the paint. Too close, you lose the hand you did it with, again. The calendar on the barracks wall lost its meaning. The men measured days and bruises and burns, and how many fingers still had feeling after a dead cord misfire that had snapped too close. One evening, after a particularly bad run where a misjudged charge would have collapsed a tunnel on half their number, Reed gathered them in the half-light of the yard. He pointed at a crude chalk sketch of Tenrai-jima scratched onto a board. This is not just another island, he said. It is 1944. The enemy knows he is losing. That makes him more dangerous, not less. He tapped the central cliff. Here, under this rock, they have built themselves a brain. Radar, radios, wired telephones, a bunker deep enough to laugh at random shelling. That brain tells their guns where to shoot, their planes where to intercept, their patrols where to look. He turned, looking at each face in turn. In a few weeks, a convoy will sail within range of this island, thousands of men. Fuel, ammunition, everything needed to hit the next stepping stone on the road to Japan. He let the image hang for a second. If Tenrai-jima is fully awake, that corridor becomes a killing ground. You have seen what coastal guns do to unarmored hulls. They had. Some had helped strip twisted metal and charred flesh off returning wrecks. Red felt a cold knot settle in his gut. He'd stolen from a lot of people in his life. He'd never looked at a whole convoy as a single thing that could be stolen or spared. You, Reed said quietly, "or the difference between those ships sliding by in the dark and burning from stem to stern while men scream in the water." The Texan snorted, a tired, bitter sound. 40 crooks to save a fleet," he muttered. "Hell of a joke." Reed heard him. "Exactly," he said. "If you die there, command can say nothing. If you live, they will never put your names on a plaque. That is by design." He stepped closer, his voice dropping. "But you will know that, in 1944, on a nameless piece of rock in the middle of too much ocean, 40 men no one wanted walked into the dark so thousands of others wouldn't have to." For the first time since they'd met him, there was something in Reed's eyes that looked almost like emotion, not pride, not pity. Something harder. Choice. "Last time," he said, "to step back. Anyone who doesn't want this, go now. Back to the brig, back to the wire. War's almost over. You can wait it out behind a fence." The yard was very quiet. Some men shifted their weight. One stared at the ground so hard his neck muscles shook. Another chewed his lip until it bled. Red looked around and realized something that surprised even him. No one moved. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was the simple fact that once you'd been offered a chance to matter, rotting in a cage became impossible, whatever the odds. Hanley scratched a mark on his clipboard. 40 committed, he said. Reed nodded. "Then we stop training for some day," he said. "And start training for a date." He turned back to the map. Tenraijima, night of the convoy, 1944. You will not forget that year, even if the world forgets you. The sun slid down toward the horizon as if someone had cut its supports. Shadows stretched long across the yard, swallowing the chalk lines and wooden obstacles. In a few weeks, that same sun would be setting on a very different shore, over jungle instead of sand, over concrete instead of barracks. Between now and then, every bruise, every chokehold, every misfire was just interest building on a single deadly debt. 40 men were about to go collect it. The submarine broke the surface in total blackout, a black shape in a black sea. 40 men climbed out, rubber boats slapping quietly against the hull. No orders, no speeches, just Reed's low command. Straight in, no lights. They paddled toward the darker mass of Tenraijima. Above, a few pinpricks of yellow on the cliffs marked guard posts. Beneath, the island hummed with generators and confidence. The boats scraped rock. They hauled them into a crevice camouflaged with nets and loose stones. Ahead, a narrow goat path zigzagged up the cliff. "Single file," Hanley whispered. "You slip, you fall quiet." They climbed, boots sliding on damp stone, waves pounding invisibly below. Halfway up, they reached the half-buried tunnel mouth, old concrete, rusted bolts where a gate had hung. Ghost and Hanley slipped inside first. No gunshots, no shouts. "Clear," came the whisper. The tunnel was cold and wet, lined with pipes and thick cable bundles. They followed the largest cables deeper into the rock, passing side chambers and bored sentries who never finished turning around. Ghost removed those quietly. The nerve center was exactly where Reed's briefing had promised. A concrete room packed with switchboards, radios, relay racks, and a humming main junction cabinet. 3 Japanese operators died before their hands reached alarms. 3 minutes, Reed snapped. Briggs worked like a surgeon. Small charges on the main power junction, 2 on the relay rack feeding radar and coastal guns. Det cord snaked back along the wall, caps twisted on with calloused fingers. Red handed him explosives, placing them with a safecracker's precision. Diaz checked in a whisper. Team 2 on the secondary power room, standing by. Hanley. Escape route to shaft is clear. Reed's voice stayed flat. On my mark. 3, 2, 1, mark. They were already moving when the first blast hit. Deep inside the rock, pressure slammed through the tunnels. Lights flickered, then died. A rolling boom chased them toward the shaft. More explosions overlapped as secondary charges tore through cables and panels. Somewhere above, sirens wailed and choked. Guns barked wild into a sky their gutted systems could no longer see. At the maintenance shaft, they ignored the groaning elevator and hit the ladder. Boots hammered rungs, hands slipping on rust. They burst out onto a service ledge, lungs burning. Below, the island burned. Fuel tanks venting fire, tracers arcing blind, searchlights sweeping uselessly. Tenraijima was awake and panicking. "Ravine route!" Hanley yelled. "Move!" They cut across the ledge, ran down stone steps into jungle now lit by orange glow. Gunfire chased them, wild and high. Ghost and Hanley dropped 2 squads that blundered into their path, blades in short, suppressed bursts doing the work quickly. In the ravine, the island's noise dulled. At the far end, an old drainage culvert punched out toward the sea. "This is it," Diaz panted. "Straight to the cove." They crawled through and spilled onto the rock shelf over their landing point. The boats were gone. Only drag marks and disturbed stones remained. "Gone," someone whispered. "They found them." No time for shock. Reed's decision came in one breath. "Strip to what you need," he said. "Radios, knives, ammo. Everything else over the side. We swim to the sub's listening point. We miss it. We improvise or we don't." Gear clattered onto rock. Rifles, tools, extra magazines. Briggs dumped the last spare charges into a tide pool, turned away without watching them fizz. "Jump," Reed ordered. The ocean hit like ice and stone at once. Red fought to the surface, gasped salt air, heard curses and prayers all around. They swam into blackness, island fires at their backs. Behind them, more explosions rolled through Tenraijima, fuel cooking off, ammo going sympathetic. Coastal guns spat blindly at ghosts. Men slipped under. Some came back up, some didn't. Red grabbed the tattooed kid as he sank a second time. "Kick," he snarled. "You don't get to quit before the story's told." They pushed on until muscles barely answered. Then, finally, a low, dark hump in the water. The sub barely surfaced. A blink of red light, then ropes snaking out. Rough hands dragged them aboard. "Count!" Reed coughed. Hanley's response was flat. 29. 40 had left Brig Island. 29 lay shivering on the submarine's wet deck, chests heaving, eyes wide in the red glow. No cheering, just the knowledge of what wasn't happening out there. Somewhere beyond Tenraijima, a convoy would pass through a corridor the island could no longer see or coordinate. No precise gunfire, no guided night attacks, just ships sliding past an enemy fortress that for a few critical hours had been turned deaf and blind by men nobody wanted. In the passageway below, Reed paused by Red. "You did your job, Mallory," he said quietly. Red gave a tired, crooked smile. "For once," he muttered, "we stole something worth stealing." The sub turned away into the dark, leaving Thunder Island burning behind them. In the official record, its defenses would be listed as unexpectedly ineffective. No mention of 40 convicts who had gone in through its veins. No names, no medals. But ships would arrive that should have died. Men would live who should have burned. And somewhere, in the shadows where real wars are decided, someone would remember that in 1944, an army took its worst men, pointed them at an impossible target, and watched them become something very close to the best.